both NATO and the Russians had, they call them military liaison missions. The Russians in West Germany were called SMELMs. Soviet military liaison missions, and these were high-ranking. They were lieutenant colonels in the Russian army. They were stationed in West Germany, and they were kind of there to keep us honest. Although there were certain areas they were not allowed to go into. And if you caught them there, you could not lay hands on them to physically restrain them, but you would immediately report they were there. The MPs would come in and they could do it if they needed to. You know, one of the goals was, or one of the, you could be really cool if you ever caught a smellum. And I got one.
You got one?
I got one. We had deployed out to an area outside of our caserne in the woods. We had just gone out there and we were practicing moving into an assembly area, which is an area that you bring your unit into, and that's where you refuel and resupply and do some other things.
And the smellum was not supposed to be in there?
They weren't supposed to be there. They were in a brand new Mercedes sedan, and they always had to be in uniform. If they were in civilian clothes, they could get nailed as being spies. Espionage agents. Sure. But if they were in Soviet military uniform, that was it, smell them. So we saw one. Well, one of my tank commanders called up me on the radio and said, "Sir, you know, we've got a German Mercedes cruising around here, and the guy in front looks like he's wearing a Soviet uniform." I said, "Really?" Okay, so I reported it up, and the guy came down one of these very narrow wood roads, and so we put a tank behind him and a tank in front of him, and he couldn't get anywhere. Now, he was madder than hell. Yeah. But by that time, they had MPs and they had officers more senior than me there, and he was escorted away.
Escorted back across the border.
Where he was supposed to be.
Did we have counterparts over in East Germany?
We did. They were called U-SMELMs.
U-SMELMs.
Yeah, United States Military Liaison Mission. You had UK Melons, United Kingdom Military Liaison Missions. You had French Military Liaison Missions. You did not have West German, however. It was just United States, France, and England. And we had them doing the same thing. They pushed the envelope also. They try to get in. And a lot of your intelligence on new equipment, like new tanks or new weapon systems, came from these military liaison missions who would follow these guys around when they were out doing maneuvers or on convoy from one place to the other taking pictures. If they got caught, they'd confiscate their cameras and whatever else, give them a really hard time. Soviets are very careful about not roughing up a U-SMELM or a UK or a French, because they had their own guys on our side, and tit for tat it would, But I'll tell you another story there. The East German-West German border was incredibly fortified. The Russians did that, and they didn't do it to keep us out. They did it to keep the East German population in. People need to understand that. And it went from the North Sea to the Swiss border, Czech border. And at the time, they hadn't completely fortified the Czech border. The ones who manned the border outpost were an organization in the German army called Grundesbundschutz, and think of them as kind of a mixture of forest rangers and border guards. And these guys, they all had dogs, meticulously trained German shepherds, but these guys had a sector they were assigned to, and they stayed there their entire career. And they could tell you on their side if a branch was broken the day before. I mean, that's how well they knew it. Probably about a 10-mile section that was theirs, and they
knew every inch of that
sector. And at the time, if there were East Germans trying to cross and get into West Germany, the United States at that time was not allowed to do anything to assist them in coming across until they actually crossed into the West German. When they hit West German soil, then we could do whatever we needed to do to help them. To get back to the story I want to tell you, I was a young second lieutenant, and my battalion was sent down to relieve, for a 2-week period, a cavalry troop who was responsible for guarding part of the Czech border. So they were right there on the border staring at the Czechs and the Russians staring back at them. My job one day was to take a 4-man patrol, and we did this every single day, go out and walk the border and just walk back again, just patrolled 5 miles each way, report anything we saw or did or whatever. And I remember being sat down by my battalion commander, my company commander. The S3 was a major, battalion commander, lieutenant colonel, company commander, captain, stressing, you need to understand, you are not authorized to cross into Czechoslovakia. If you do that, your career is over, and quite frankly, you will probably spend the rest of your time in Leavenworth. So they emphasize on you, you are not to do that. So off we go, and I have got any NCO in the Army since going all the way back to Caesar's legions will tell you the most dangerous thing in the Army is a second lieutenant and a map.
How did you know where the border was located?
Oh, it's there. You got it on a map. There's a great big red.
On the map?
On the map they give you.
But that red line's not on the ground.
It's not on the ground. You've got to use your map to read it. And so there we are. We're walking around and we're doing fine, and I'm completely checking my map and I'm looking, and we come up over this small rise, and as we come up over this small rise, right there in front of us is a Soviet patrol.
How close?
Soviet set up from me to the door. We stopped, we looked at each other, we looked down at our maps, we knew somebody was lost. Looked back down at our maps, and and on both sides I could hear the snick, 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 snick of safeties going off. Them and me, my guys. And so I'm telling my guys, I'm looking down, I'm looking up, and so then we both just kind of started backing up and turned around. So, the kid behind me was an NCO sergeant with the radio, and he goes, "Sir, that wasn't you. They were on our side." And I said, "God, I hope so." So we radioed it in. They immediately told us to return. They put another patrol out there. It was a huge investigation, to make sure that I had, because the last thing they needed is some stupid second lieutenant can't read a map starting World War III on the Czech border. So anyway, they take us back out. We walk through, and I retired as a Colonel 06, so I was not
So
lost.
you were on the right side.
I was on the right side. I was on the right side.
Where were you, and what were you thinking when the Iron Curtain came down?
It actually was in the United States.
Were you retired or still in the...
No, I was still in active duty.
Still in active duty.
And I was stunned. I have to tell you, I went back to Germany in '96, and I got the chance to travel on, so I went back to Frankfurt, I went back to Friedberg, and I actually went up into our where our GDP position had been back in the 70s and 80s. And at that time, we had left. 5th Corps was gone, 3rd Armored Division was gone. They pulled, those units all had been taken out of Germany for Desert Storm 1. At the end of Desert Storm, they came back to the United States, or they were deactivated. They did not go back to Germany, because that was, of course, after the Soviet Union had melted down. The two Germanys had reunited. So I'm walking across this motor pool where my tanks used to be. I'd been there for 5 years, and it's rusted, and it's weeds growing up and all that stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm feeling a little nostalgic and a little sad about it. And then it all of a sudden struck me, my God, why in the world are you sad? We won.
Yes.
We won without a war. You know what I'm saying?
Isn't that the number one job of a person in the Army or the Air Force or the Marines or the Navy, is to prevent war?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the number one job.
Absolutely. I will tell you right now.
And that's what you did.
Well, yeah, me and many others.
Of course.
People think oftentimes of people in the military wanting to go fight. Let me tell you what, these kids in the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, they're the last ones in the world who want to see a war start, because they're the ones that are going to have to fight it and be crippled, maimed, or die. They do not want it to happen. If it does happen, they're prepared to do it. Those are the last warmongers in the world you'll ever find in uniform. It's the guys in Congress and the civilians that start the wars. It's these kids we put in uniform that have to bleed and die for it.